Welcome to the American Freedom Alliance Parresia podcast. Parresia is ancient Greek for that one bold voice, and that is what we aim to be. And we highlight those who also speak out with boldness and courage against the juggernaut of misinformation at best. I'm Karen Siegemund, your host, and I'm really happy to be here with my friend James Simpson, who I know originally as an author. He spoke at a couple of our conferences, but in addition to that, he worked in the White House as a budget examiner. He was an official in the Office of Management and Budgets, an economist, a businessman, an author, again, as I said, and a researcher on topics that are near and dear to all of us in the form of threats to our freedoms one way or another. Jim, welcome. Glad to be with you.
Hey, Karen. Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. You had joined when I did podcasts with Elizabeth, you were on with us a number of times. Elizabeth Savage-Wolf, another fiercely bold voice, a real hero.
Yep.
I'd like to take us through the books that you've written. Your first one was on the RedGreen Axis, or there were a pair of them on the RedGreen Axis. How did you come to put these things together, the red and green? What does that mean? Why an axis versus an alliance? And what was it that spurred you to write the books, both the pair?
Yeah, well, I was asked to write actually an article about refugee resettlement because that was a pretty hot topic in 2015 because we were planning, the Obama administration was planning on importing a whole bunch of Syrian refugees. And a lot of us were very concerned that, one, there would be terrorists in the mix, which turns out to have been true. And the whole issue of refugee resettlement overall as one of the aspects of the Democrat open borders immigration agenda. And the refugee resettlement program was a big part of that agenda, passed with the Refugee Act in 1980 by Jimmy Carter. It basically flipped the entire script on refugee resettlement from people who were fleeing communist countries where they were being oppressed, dictatorships of all styles, but primarily communist, to people the communists who were fleeing from the governments that they were trying to overthrow. And one example, really funny example, Governor Jerry Brown in 1980, before the Refugee Act was passed, or actually in 1979 or 78, he attempted to prevent a plane load of refugees from Vietnam from landing in California. Why? Because he knew the refugees coming from Vietnam were going to be stridently anti-communist, and therefore were not going to be Democrat voters. And that's all he cared about. And, but the Refugee Act basically opened the doors to the world. Well, actually, it started with with the 1965 Immigration and Nationalities Act, which was passed thanks to Teddy Kennedy. But most people don't know that act was largely written by the California Communist Party leaders who had gotten in very closely with Teddy Kennedy, and they supported JFK's presidential election. So
it
it
was
really
literally California Communist Party, they called themselves.
The leaders of the California Communist Party. And I can't remember the guy's name, escapes me right now, but I wrote an article about it for WorldNet Daily. And anyway, so the whole idea was to create a form of immigration that would bring in people from all over the world, for a variety of reasons. One, because most of them would be coming from poor countries, and therefore, because of all the welfare benefits, would be more likely to vote Democrat. One big deal. And then the other one is that none of them really understood the U.S. Constitution, didn't have any connection or belief in our national values, our Judeo-Christian culture and heritage, our rule of law. All they cared about was the pennies. And the Democrats saw that as a great way to dilute the power of constitutional Republicans in, traditional America. It was a great way to do it, whether it was through refugee resettlement or through immigration, legal and especially illegal. So really, it's all part of the same thing. And unfortunately, many of the refugees were coming from Muslim countries, which creates a whole nother issue because, of course, we've had Muslim Islamic terrorism since the 1970s. And in every circumstance, when large populations of Muslims have been allowed to resettle in Western nations, they begin trying to take it over. And you also get, as we've had in the United States numerous times since then, and of course in Germany and France, horribly, and in Great Britain, numerous terrorist acts. And so these are all things of huge concern. And the thing was that I know and have always known that the Islamic radicals have always been under the thumb of the Soviet KGB. And that's because after World War II, they no longer could count on Germany for support. They were very anti-Jew, of course. And so the Muslim Brotherhood turned to the KGB, or maybe more correctly, the KGB basically came in and took them over, and they gave them arms, they gave them training, and they gave them whatever they needed to continue their war against the West.
When and where was this happening? When and where was the KGB giving arms to Muslim?
After World War II. The KGB came in and solicited the Muslim Brotherhood got the assistance of the KGB. Ayman al-Zawahiri, KGB's number 2, who became number 1 after number 1 was killed, was a Soviet agent. That was one of the revelations that got Alexander Litvinenko, the KGB officer who defected to Great Britain, poisoned with polonium-210. That was one of his revelations, that Ayman al-Zawahiri was a KGB agent, been trained by the KGB. And the thing is, so the Muslim radicals and the left have conspired, have joined forces to overthrow the West, and of course, most importantly, the United States. And but all organizations have a hierarchy. This is just basic facts of life. And when you're a communist dealing with communists, the communists are never second fiddle. The communists are always the ones on top, and whoever they join forces with they're not equal partners. They're not equal partners. And Vladimir Lenin, the first leader of the Soviet Union, began cultivating relationships with Muslims almost from the very beginning, because he saw this massive population of people whose very religion, if you call it that, it's not really a religion, it's more of a political military doctrine. But They're a perfect proxy army for everything that the Soviets wanted to do. And the Soviets have always preferred working through proxies. About the only time they didn't was when they marched into Afghanistan and got their rear ends handed to them and they had to march back out. But every other war that we fought, whether North Korea, Vietnam, all the little Bush wars all around the country, all around the world, it's always other groups working, but in fact, underneath it, behind it all, is the Soviet Union and more recently, increasingly, the Chinese Communist Party.
I was
So,
going to ask, at what point did it
yeah,
pivot from, this
well,
alliance in your eyes
I
pivot
have
from?
a kind of a different take on that. I don't believe
Yeah.
it ever really completely pivoted. The fall of the Soviet Union and the so-called collapse of communism really it it was a long planned deception campaign. It was not a real thing. We
the
did
fall,
not.
the
We
fall
did
of it.
not. What?
Mhm. The
Yeah.
fall of the Soviet Union
Fall
was
of the Soviet Union. That was a long planned deception campaign, and it comes right out of Sun Tzu. It's called denying your enemy an enemy. You deny your enemy an enemy, and you leave him with no excuse to build up his military and defend himself against the big evil Soviet Union because it doesn't exist anymore. And it worked even better than they had hoped. You know, President H.W. Bush began cutting back on military spending almost immediately. By the time Clinton got through with it, we were at hollow force levels. We had three uh, uh, battle ready divisions out in our entire army. Three ready, 30,000 men. Not enough, not nearly enough for the types of, even for to fight two regional wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Um,
so.
and
To what
so,
end? To what end were they denying us an enemy? What
well,
was?
that's the end. First of all, they're no longer an enemy, so we don't have to fight against them. We don't have to build up our, military against this so-called Soviet threat because the Soviet threat has disappeared. And so Republicans declared themselves victors. We defeated communism. Reagan defeated Soviet communism. The Democrats said, see, they were never that dangerous to begin with. So they both declared themselves the winner and went home and then talked about spending the peace dividend, the so-called peace dividend, before Ted Kennedy had spent 300 billion or had proposed 300 billion in spending from the peace dividend before there was any peace dividend. So they just couldn't wait to get their hands on that money and take it out of the military and use it for their own political purposes. And um, and so the Soviet Union has kind of fallen out of sight and is no longer considered that serious of a threat. But as I describe in my book on Karl Marx, the Soviets still have the most intercontinental ballistic missiles of any country, more than us, many more than communist China. They have the most modern technology, as as good as ours, but better than China. And they have a much bigger navy than China. Now, China is rapidly catching up, but uh, in my mind, it's as much part of the deception as everything else because we're turning our eyes towards communist China. And of course, we have done so much business with communist China uh, after um, Richard Nixon, opened the door to China. One of the most foolish foreign policy decisions uh, in our recent memory, thanks to Henry Kissinger. And And of course, thinking that there was a Sino-Soviet split and we could capitalize on that. But it reflects yet again ignorance about communism.
So the
Communists,
idea was to ally with China to keep a Sino-Soviet or
yeah,
Sino-Russian
well,
Sino-Russian
so that
alliance.
so that if there was ever a war, maybe the communist Chinese would fight on our side against, it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous notion. Um, but in the meantime, China opened its doors to American business, and they all went piling in there to take advantage of the cheap labor. And of course, what did we do with everything that we gave to them? Uh, they were able to build their military and build their economy uh, at a very rapid pace. And they don't have a capitalist economy. What they have is an economy controlled by the communists. As Deng Xiaoping said, former leader of the Chinese Communist Party, said, "We don't want to defeat capitalism, we want to control it." And that's exactly what they set out to do. And so there are places where there are factories, and those factories are all run by the sons and daughters of Communist Party members themselves, members of the intelligence branch, uh, the Chinese version of the KGB. The party still runs everything. The party uh, benefits. Nobody else benefits. You know, people work 15 hours a day for pennies, and and really, it's very immoral that we allowed ourselves to be taken this way, just so that we could import products that were much cheaper than they would be if they were made here.
Because we won't allow that kind of behavior by corporations here, not against people, not against the environment, not against anybody. So we can have this do-gooderism sense that it's not happening here. We're pricing everybody out, but it's okay to buy it if it's from China.
Right, from communist China, where the human rights record. I mean, for crying out loud, they have an entire organ harvesting industry where they murder entire groups of people. The Falun Gong, the the what's the name of that Muslim
The
group?
Uyghurs.
The Uyghurs. Yeah, I mean, they're all thousands in jail, and they're just in jail waiting to die to sacrifice their organs. It's it's ghastly. It's ghastly. I mean, we should not be doing any business with communist China at all. But anyway, but that's your question about the RedGreen
RedGreen
Axis.
Alliance. Right,
The
exactly.
so,
Yes.
it is the collaboration between the radical left, which really is the Communist Party, and it's actually the international communist movement, if you boil it all down, uh, and and the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamic uh, supremacist groups. And the funny thing is that people think that this is an alliance of convenience, where they both are, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and they're both working together. But the fact of the matter is, most of the top Islamic radicals are actually communists. I mean, for example, Nihad Awad, he was a member of the Students for Palestine in living in Philadelphia. Students for Palestine was a communist group, just as the Palestine Liberation Organization was a communist group created by the KGB. Palestine Front for the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP, another communist group created by the KGB. These were not Islamic groups. Yasser Arafat, the first leader of the PLO, was not a devout Muslim. He was a communist. He was a devout communist. And so Nihad Awad was a communist because that's what the youth, Palestine Youth Organization was, a communist organization. And yet again, what people don't know about communism is it's like joining the mafia. When you're in, you're in. You don't get to leave. You do not get to leave. You're once a communist, always a communist, like it or not. But what happened was uh, he saw, or he was probably more likely told, um, this is a perfect opportunity to insert Islam into our movement so that we have two separate armies working towards the same goal. And so Nihad Awad became the leader of the Council on American Islamic Relations, which was the front group for Hamas, the Palestinian terrorist group in the United States. It's nothing more than a front group for Hamas in the United States, and it's why it is outlawed in many of the Arabian countries.
Why isn't it outlawed here? Why can't we get it designated as a terrorist group?
Terrorist group or a subversive group, because they get too much. They give too much support to the Democrats. It's like everything else.
Science, right there.
Why is George Soros not in jail for destroying entire economies, for committing treason, for undermining openly and admittedly trying to destroy our society? Why is he not in jail? Well, because he gives billions of dollars to Democrats. That's why. It's the only reason. It's the only reason. And there's so much of that going on today. But anyway, so the red-green axis is this collusion between the Islamists and the Marxists. And the Marxists are in charge, and most of the Islamists don't realize who they're fighting for. They think they're fighting for, the next caliphate or the 12th imam or whoever it is they think they're fighting for. But the fact of the matter is the top leaders absolutely have no doubt about who's calling the shots. It's why all of the mullahs in Iran studied at Moscow University, for example.
So
And
when the Prime Minister of Canada said a few days ago, Muslim values are Canadian values, what, what was he signaling exactly and to whom? And it seems like there's an unbelievable asymmetry there because within hours, an imam, I don't remember who, where, but in Canada said, we need to take down the infidel, death to Canada, death to the West. So there's you say that it's the communists who are completely in charge, and yet on the surface, at the very least, it looks like they're the ones doing all the capitulating. They're the ones opening their doors to
yeah,
us, the United States as well. And certainly we've seen this in Europe. The left has opened the floodgates to invaders. And I know you talk about civilization jihad, whether it's overt violent terrorism or just cultural takeover, subversion. Um, who, how it's again back to
well, a lot of those
saying the best
yeah,
victory is one that you accomplish without firing a shot. Is
yes,
this what we're saying?
exactly. And and many of those imams, those radical imams that say things like that, they absolutely believe it's true.
Yeah.
And uh, it's kind of like, hey, this is great stuff. Just let them go. Just let them go. And that's what they did actually with the Islamic terrorists in the 70s. The KGB said, "Oh, okay, they want to hijack airlines. They want to do all kinds of stuff like that. Hey, let them just cut them loose and let them do whatever the heck they want, because it creates chaos and division, which is the entire point of my latest book, Manufactured Crisis: The War to End America. And
So
then
tell us
also,
about that, Jim. Tell us.
okay, well,
Yeah.
for example, your Canadian Prime Minister saying that about Muslims, and then being followed immediately by this very provocative statement from an imam. Uh, they're thrilled with the idea. They don't mind that at all,
Who's they?
because
Which they
the
is
prime minister, the prime minister, the prime minister, his cabinet, the people on the left, they want to hear that kind of stuff. Why? Because it creates anger, it creates fear, it creates division, it creates bafflement, and uh, the goal is to detach us from any anchors to reality. The goal is to create so much chaos that we don't know where to go. And many people, we are, I hate to say it, herd animals. Many people, when they are in that state of fear and panic, they will gravitate towards anyone or any group that has any kind of firm direction or guidance. And I mean, for example, during when the Soviet Union, when they first took over, uh, they created what the first KGB leader, Felix Dzerzhinsky, called the Red Terror. And the Red Terror was designed to do that specifically. It was designed to create so much terror in the population that they would just throw up their arms and do anything. They'd do anything. They wouldn't dare even question, uh, like, no matter how crazy, they wouldn't question any order that came down from the government. Dzerzhinsky said, uh, "But people get upset when we kill them for seeming trifles. Let's see what they say when we start killing them for no reason at all." You know, this is the kind of thing they want to create chaos. And my book came out this year, very timely, uh, deliberately this year, because I mean, it came out before the election, and I hoped and prayed that the election would turn out as it did. Thank God it did, because I think our country would have been done. That would have been the end of it if it hadn't. Kamala Harris and Walz both are very connected to the Communist Chinese Party. We would essentially been having, Communist Party China leading our country, uh, with Harris and Walz as the public face of that. But the point is, we've been in a war for 100 years and we don't know it. And it's been a culture war. It's been a war on many, many, many different fronts, but none military, because military is our strength. They don't want to attack us at our strength. They want to attack us at our weak points. And what are those? Our culture, specifically and especially um, racial and ethnic divisions. I mean, the NAACP was created in the 1920s by white socialists. It wasn't created by blacks. In fact, the only black on the board at the beginning was W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a dedicated communist. And in fact, he was such an outspoken communist, they eventually had to throw him off the board because he was embarrassing them and they were losing donations. But they were all white socialists. Most people don't know that. And most people also don't know that from the very beginning, the Soviet Communist Party directed the American Communist Party to seek to create and inflame the divisions that already existed between black and white America. And their goal was really to make blacks so angry that they would become their foot soldiers in the revolution to come. And
So the
that,
racial divide replaced the original Marxist class divide. They couldn't
yes,
implement, interclass warfare with the workers of the world. But I also, before we talk about the various crises that you cover in this very important book, it seems to me that part of what they've been doing, and correct me if I'm wrong, yes, there are these crises, but they're also destabilizing us on a number of fronts in order to make us more helpless in the face of these crises. Family, of course, religion, churches, Judeo-Christian values, having our institutions work, for example, education, the media. And then you mentioned they've been fighting us in the culture. I've sort of decided that to the left, there is no such culture divide, politics versus culture. To the left, absolutely everything is political. And
yeah,
so
it's all,
it's all
yeah,
right. So when we talk about politics being downstream from culture, we've created this sense of division. And I think it makes it very hard for us to, for example, fundraise for things like movies and TV shows and ways of combating it that the left has long understood to be a political battlefield. So is it fair to say they've been undermining any institution, family, schools, media, religion, with the exception of Islam, but Judeo-Christian religion, so that we're already weakened when they bring about these crises? Is that fair to say?
absolutely, absolutely. And they've been chipping it away at it for decades, and it really only came out of the closet when President Trump was elected. I mean, fully. I mean, it's always come out of the closet to a certain extent. When Reagan was elected, there was a similar hullabaloo then. Uh, it wasn't anything. It wasn't nearly as extreme as what happened to President Trump, but it was similar kind of thing. Same with George W. Bush. He stole the 2000 election. Supposedly. When really, well, anyway, I won't get into that. Uh, but the whole thing, it's been going on for 100+ years. They've been trying to undermine and destabilize our society and our culture. And it's very funny because they realized early on, while Marx was wrong about the whole workers of the world unite idea, that the working class was not going to be their revolutionaries. Uh, but it tells you two things at once. They didn't really care about the workers of the world because the workers of the world were happy.
Exactly
What
right.
they cared about, what they cared about was taking over our society. What they really cared about, what they've always cared about, and the only thing they've ever cared about is power, absolute power. That's all they wanted. And it's so funny because Willy Munzenberg, who was a German communist in the Vladimir Lenin's inner circle, brilliant guy. He was that era's George Soros. He funded all kinds of movie theaters and magazines and promoted communism through these organs. He created the Popular Front idea. He created the Hollywood Anti-Nazi League. He was very popular with the Hollywood set. A very smart guy, very charming guy actually, and very dedicated communist. And he said, we must organize the intellectuals and use them to make Western civilization stink, because only then, when we have corrupted all its values and made life impossible, can we impose communism. And then a German communist leader, a lady friend of his, said, well, Willie was very clever in identifying the intellectuals. Uh, and by intellectuals, we mean a job description, not an actual attribute of
Right.
these people. It's a job description. I'm an intellectual. And all you had to do, you didn't have to pay the intellectuals anything. All you had to do was flatter them. And so they're going to use the intellectuals, and another person, uh, French polemicist, called it the treason of the intellectuals. And you couldn't make a better description of what the media and Hollywood, and especially the professional educational infrastructure, they are the heart of the problem. And, they're safely ensconced in their tenured positions, but they can fight the revolution, be really cool, without any risk to themselves. But in the process, they're destroying our entire society and destroying entire generations of our children. And that's another element of it that I discuss in the book, is it's really an attack on our kids. What way could you horrify, enrage, and just make more chaos and division than attacking children? And that's what they're doing with the entire uh, transgender
Yes.
agenda and everything about, teaching sex in public schools. In 1919, Herbert um, um, Georgy Lukács was the Minister of Culture in the Hungarian Soviet Republic in 1919, and he created a program that he called cultural terrorism. And you know what it was? It was explicit sex education to children in public schools, and a nationwide campaign telling women to leave their husbands and go out and mess around.
Absolutely.
Incredible. He called it cultural terrorism. And
And
that's
here
what it
we are.
is. It's a form of terrorism. And here we are. And he brought that indirectly to the United States because he was one of the people who inspired creation of the Frankfurt School, the School for Social Research, founded in 1923 in Frankfurt, Germany, which came to the United States and resettled at Columbia Teachers College in 1933, and became the place where most educators got their degrees. And it's where we got critical theory and then critical race theory. And in my book, I go at great lengths to discuss critical legal theory, which has replaced constitutional law in most law schools as the driving legal theory for newly graduated attorneys.
Describe
And
that. Describe critical legal theory.
critical legal theory is, well, critical theory comes from Marx, who said we must criticize everything existing in culture,
Yes.
in society, and tearing it down. And so critical legal theory, believes that the U.S. Constitution is a phony construct of the white supremacist patriarchy, and it has to be destroyed. And so that's the basis for critical legal theory. And I mean, it goes into much more detail than that. But that's how we get these judges that are making up law.
Right.
That's how we get these judges that are doing things they're just not allowed to do, because these guys have gotten critical legal theory into their heads, and they think, well, we're entitled. The Constitution is this outdated, reflection of the white supremacist patriarchy. It needs to be destroyed.
And then
So,
we have this
anyway,
Supreme Court justice saying we don't need all this legalese and it's I love being a Supreme Court justice because I can say what I feel.
yeah.
It's just completely extraordinary. Just
I can say what I feel. You had to be a Supreme Court justice to do that. And what does that have to do with being a
what
Supreme Court justice?
but I imagine she's a complete product of exactly this.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah. Well, the whole leftist educational system is really driving that bus for all forms of study. And I would suggest that it has a lot to do with why we saw so many doctors violate their Hippocratic oath during COVID.
That's right. Wasn't that an astounding thing?
Yeah,
And complete I used the word during all that time. They were apparatchiks. They
yeah,
weren't
that,
practicing medicine. They were full on
exactly, exactly,
apparatchiks, right?
exactly.
What other crises, um, in
Did
the
we
we
discuss in the book?
yeah.
Oh my
What are the
goodness.
top ones? Give us the
Well,
top ones, Jim.
there are dozens of them. Let me just read the table of contents. Uh, well, weaponizing the poor, the war against Black America. That's a really important chapter because it documents what has happened to Black America, and that it was a deliberate strategy to keep Black America depressed, uh, uh, angry, uneducated, and without recourse, without any kind of uh, or very few opportunities for advancement. Now, of course, affirmative action put a, put a lot of Black people into positions where they wouldn't have been otherwise. A lot of times, they even say, "We wish we didn't get that because it didn't work out for us." But but those were a very small proportion. For the most part, Blacks were kept, uh, in the inner cities, and the inner cities all run by Democrats, most of them Black. Uh,
Right.
really don't care about what goes on in the inner cities. They are uh, the Black cops are at least as abusive towards their citizens as the white cops are, more abusive in many cases because they feel entitled to. They feel like they're not going to get in as much trouble.
The crime
Um,
situation is just horrific.
Crime
It hit
situation. Well, that's
yeah,
another crisis
yeah,
strategy. When you
yeah.
get these attorneys who refuse, the prosecutors who refuse to prosecute crime, that's been going on for decades in Baltimore, but now it's all over the country with these Soros supported um, district attorneys.
And taking
Um,
fathers out of the home.
Taking fathers out of the home. I talk about the uh, in the 60s and the 50s, there was an effort to make sure that Black families uh, on welfare, women, you know, leading families on welfare, that there wasn't a man in the house. It was called a man in the house rule. And they would drive buses around Black neighborhoods at 10 o'clock at night and literally drag men out of the houses, away from their children, away from their families, to enforce this absurd law. And, I have a very interesting chart in that um, chapter that shows, for many years, the amount of children born out of wedlock to Black women was flat. It was
Yes.
higher than that of white women, but it was flat. But in the 60s, it began to go up and it curved way up to the point where now about 70% of children are born out of wedlock. And that chart then takes incarceration rates 20 years later, and you put the one chart on top of the other, and they almost fit perfectly because, single parent households, and then I go into a lot of other reasons why that prove that single parent households, they're much poorer, uh, and their children grow up to be criminals much more often, and it just creates all kinds of problems. But this was a strategy of the left, and they were honest about it. The You've heard of Richard Cloward and Francis Fox Piven.
Yes.
The infamous Cloward-Piven strategy of manufactured crisis, which I first wrote about in 2008 with an article that went viral, and Glenn Beck picked it up and turned it into a whole series of shows. Manufactured crisis, they made it explicit. They wanted blacks to be angry. They said, we don't want them to be happy. In fact, they said, welfare is dousing the fires of rebellion. And so they didn't want welfare. However, Richard Cloward, nonetheless, was the inspiration for Johnson's, President Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. Richard Cloward was his inspiration for that. And the reason,
the evil of this, Jim, the evil is breathtaking.
The evil is unbelievable. Well, for Johnson, of course, he saw it as a great way to capture an entire voting bloc for forever, which is pretty much, he said explicitly, what he wanted to do. But
using the N-word, if I recall.
Oh yes, absolutely. Yep, we'll have them voting for us for 200 years.
Stunning.
Yeah, but Cloward and Piven, they wanted to take welfare and make welfare such a burden that the government would collapse. And then when it collapsed, they would come up with a solution. And their solution was a guaranteed annual income. And now today you saw in Joe Biden's, some of his bills, there were proposals for a guaranteed annual income. And there are many pilot programs in counties all around the country, although they call it universal basic income now. But the idea was, okay, so we pack the rolls with welfare recipients to the point that the whole thing collapses, and then there will be riots in the street. That's what they wanted to create. They wanted to create riots in the street because the government could support. So then their answer was to provide this guaranteed annual income, which in today's dollars would have been between $40,000 and $80,000 for a family of four. Now, think about that. For every family in the United States receiving something like that, whether they worked or not, is that less than what we were spending on welfare? Furthermore, would the welfare programs be replaced by that, or would they just be added to? So it actually was a way to create even bigger burdens, to create an even bigger crisis, to create an even bigger collapse. And I quote Vladimir Lenin in the beginning. Let me just see it here. I've got it. Because it's classic. Cloward and Piven did not come up with the crisis strategy. They made it popular. But the point is, the communist movement has always used that as a way to collapse societies and take power. This is what Lenin said: deepen the contradictions, that is, exaggerate, exacerbate existing crises, problems, social and ethnic differences and disparities, opinions, discrepancies, rifts, etc. And if they don't exist, create them, or if you can't create them, convincingly claim that they exist and then deepen them, and in the process profit the most from them in any way you can, politically, ideologically, and financially, to bankroll the left, and in the resulting chaos, blame our enemies for the whole mayhem, and finally come up with solutions that will favor us and that will be the root of new future crises to be exploited in the future, and so on, until the targeted capitalist society is destroyed completely, to then build under Bolshevik supervision and control a socialist society en route to communism. And that's what they have been trying to do. And that was the purpose of me writing this book, because people need to understand the depth of the crisis that we are actually in. And we've gotten a brief respite thanks to the election of Donald Trump, thanks to enough people waking up. But my goal with this book was to get the rest of us to wake up and realize, I don't care if you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, you do not want what these people want. You do not want it. You do not want communist Cuba. You do not want North Korea. You do not want communist China. You do not want a society where you are a caged animal, even if you live in your own home.
Jim, the idea is good. They just haven't done it right.
Right. Yeah. My own daughter
Right?
said that. Come on, Dad.
Right.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's what kids are taught. My whole bailiwick these days is about why we're here in terms of how our education system is so completely failed, and education as a national security threat and issue, that literally people have not learned everything that you just said. You do not want what these people are out, and you case after case, they have no idea of that. All they know is the thing that I said, and then it just hasn't been done right. And I know they were hoping that under Barack Obama it would be done right, and certainly under Biden it would be done right. And Kamala was kind of a last hope. It all makes Rahm Emanuel's "Never Let a Crisis Go to Waste." What a pipe!
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
he
Right.
was in very shorthand what Lenin had said. So,
Yeah.
Jim, how do we get out of this? We're running out of time, but how what's the way past all these manufactured crises? How do we contend with this?
Well, first of all, the first thing we have to do is identify them. And that's what this book does. This book identifies virtually all of them. I'm sure I've left some out, but virtually all of them. The broad brush, it identifies all of the major ones. And I mean, global warming.
I was going to say global warming. Absolutely.
Global warming.
Yes.
I have a chapter called "Save the World, Kill Everything," and that's what the whole global warming agenda will do. It will kill everything, literally. It's just unbelievable. Our CO2 level. CO2 is not a pollutant. CO2 is plant food.
Light.
Without CO2, we all die, because plants use CO2 to create oxygen and sugars, from which we obtain food, either directly from the plants themselves or indirectly through the animals that eat the plants.
Well, they don't want to eliminate CO2. They just want to turn it back to what, the 1920s or the 1850s or something.
Well, the thing is, right now it's at 400 parts per
Don't
million.
they want 350? Isn't 350 the?
Yeah. But it's such a ridiculous thing that to do that would, if you take their argument, which their argument is totally bogus. The CO2 has no impact on the temperature. But if you even took their argument, I prove mathematically, giving them exactly what they want, net zero by 2050 would reduce temperature by about 1/10 of 1 degree Fahrenheit. It's just ridiculous joke.
Barring
And,
all else, barring a volcano from erupting, barring,
but
any.
the funniest thing, and I
Yeah,
talk about it in the book, um, there's not enough lithium in the world to provide batteries to to to
get us there.
run an electric society. There's nowhere nearly enough. But
And by the
that's
way,
just
who's
one of
mining
many.
the lithium? Who's mining the lithium?
Children are mining the lithium. It's deadly poisonous. It destroys the environment. I mean, it goes on and on. There's so many bad things and nothing good about it. It doesn't provide us with the energy we need to sustain a modern industrial society. And that's why half of these quacks say, "Oh yeah, no, that's right. We need to go back to revolutionary times when we you know, uh, looked over our open fire. Oh, you couldn't even do that because that's polluting too. You know, it's nuts. But no, we have to first identify
Yes,
all of the various agendas and recognize them for what they are. They are a military strategy of conquest. They have nothing to do. The issue is never the issue, as our old friend David Horowitz said.
correct.
The issue is always the revolution. And the revolution, it comes in the form of green energy. It comes in the form of transgender activism. It comes in the form of abortion activism. It comes in the form of so many different things. Uh, uh, um, um, High taxes, income redistribution, welfare, all of these things are part of this strategy to destroy our country and allow really truly evil people to take over. I have a chapter called Political Ponerology, the Fountain of Evil, and it describes the people who are at the top of these leadership positions, and they're actually megalomaniacal psychopaths. That's what they are. That's what Marx was. That's what Lenin was. That's what Mao was. That's what all the Kims are and were. It doesn't matter. All these people, they're just megalomaniacal psychopaths who have no qualms about mass murder, and all they care about is the power and the wealth they can accumulate at the rest of our expense. But in my last chapter in the book, which is the longest chapter in the book, I go through in all of those different categories the many things that we can do and we have to do. And some of those things, gratefully, are already being done. For example, in Florida, Ron DeSantis is defunding university DEI programs,
Yes.
and that's happening in places all over the country. It's a small start. I think personally that state universities or universities should be completely cut off from any and all government funding unless and until they create a faculty that reflects our constitutional Republican values and teaches students uh, things that they need to learn, not indoctrination, of the leftist indoctrination.
President Trump's executive orders were in the beginning of this administration heading in that exact direction. You cannot have DEI. You cannot have things that are counter to our fundamental tenets. He doesn't go so far as to say you have to teach these other things, but
Well, I mean, really, in high school, and for example, i- in Baltimore, I ran for Congress, I ran for state representative. Um, People in Baltimore, the black people in Baltimore say, please, please bring back the trades, bring back the trade schools, bring back shop class. You know, People learning those trades. We have a dearth of people to practice those trades, And the people that are practicing are making good six-figure incomes. And so, but there are lots of different things that can be done, that need to be done for the election, but it requires, once again, the political class to get off their duffs, which require us to vigorously oppose um, lackadaisical candidates and get candidates in there who are going to make the kind of changes that need to be made. And all Republican states should be following Ron DeSantis' lead, for example, in so many different ways. Some are to some extent, but uh, the people that live in those states need to literally arm twist their governors and their legislatures to enact, for example, voter ID laws, same-day voting laws, dispensing with mail-in ballot laws, things like that. That's what helped to steal the 2020 election, which was a chapter that I describe in minute detail in my book. And I don't even have to go into the whole thing where, Chinese were supposedly manipulating the tabulation results in machines. You don't even have to do that. There, there are so many ways, little ways that they cheated, that they played games, and I list hundreds of them in that chapter. That you come to the conclusion. I had people people I respect in some regards on our side who said no, it was free and fair election. There wasn't that much cheating. I'm like, really? I don't know how you could think that, but anyway, but even taking their point, you read that chapter, you can't come away from any conclusion other than that the election was
Jim,
stolen.
where can we find your books? We're out of time. Where can people find your books?
Well, I have an author page on Amazon. Just look up James Simpson. But there are a number of James Simpsons on Amazon, of course. You can look under manufactured prices, or you can go to my website, which is crisisnow.net, and that you can click right on the picture of the book, and that'll take you directly to the Amazon page where you can get it.
That's great. Jim, thank you so much for taking all this time. I really appreciate it. You've been very, very generous. Let's make sure to talk again very soon.
Great, Karen. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Really, it's been a real delight. Thank you.